thankful tonight in having one of our stalwarts here as speaker. And I'm going to modify a little line that we're all familiar with, and by the way of an introduction. And I'm just simply going to say, and there stands Mackowski like a stone wall.
He's obviously never sat through one of my talks where I move around all the time.
Is this, oh, there we go. Thank you very much. It's a delight to be back. So many familiar faces, and I put my 8-year-old son on the bus this morning and then drove straight up here. So it's exciting to be back. I was met in a parking lot by my oldest child, my daughter Stephanie, and her husband Thomas, and my granddaughters Sophie and Grace, who came over from Rochester to surprise me. So if you hear little noises in the back corner, I'd say sorry, but I'm super excited to have them here, so I'm really sorry. I'll tell you about Stephanie's connection to tonight's story in a second. Now, if you're looking at the slide and it says, wait, we're supposed to talk about Stonewall Jackson's greatest hits, and it says Harper's Ferry, I've just given away the ending. I don't know if I believe that Jackson's capture of Harper's Ferry is his greatest hit, but that's going to be my thesis for tonight, and we'll see how we get there. As you guys know, I'm with a group of historians called Emerging Civil War. There are more than 30 of us who come from public history backgrounds, and we've got free content every day on our blog, www.emergingcivilwar.com. We urge you to follow along. Lots of different writing styles, interests, backgrounds, emerging voices and perspectives in the field. And it's all free. We really believe in helping people stay connected with the story of America's defining event. Because, of course, if we don't learn from our own history, we're doomed to repeat its failures. And we fail to learn from the wisdom that it can offer us. And so that's why I rather sort of spread the gospel of the Civil War. We'd love to have you as part of that. We have a weekly podcast we do every Tuesday morning. We've got an annual symposium, a couple of great symposium attendees here, regulars for us. It's always the first weekend of every August in Spotsylvania, Virginia. Our theme this coming year will be rivalries and partnerships, with keynote speakers Harold Holzer, who will be talking about Lincoln and Jefferson Davis, and Craig Simons, who's going to compare Admiral Porter with Admiral Nimitz. You can find details about that on our website as well. I do have some of my books that are available up here. This is my commercial pitch because I have 2 granddaughters I have to spoil, and they're right here, and look how cute they are. Let them use their magic powers of cuteness on you. You're like, oh, your grandpa needs to give you some ice cream. Let me buy you this book, okay? That's how that's going to work. Since I was here last, I'll just point out a new biography that I co-authored with Kurt Fields about Ulysses S. Grant. And 2 new books about Vicksburg that are in full color as part of the Casement Illustrated series. The first book covers everything up to Grant's crossing of the river, and then book 2 talks about his inland campaign, the siege, and the surrender. So if you're interested in those new pieces. I'll be talking a bit about Jackson tonight, Stonewall Jackson tonight, so there's some books up here that have Jackson-related pieces in them as well. But to kind of understand how I'm here tonight to talk about Stonewall Jackson, who's a dude I would not want to hang out with, but who I'm endlessly fascinated with. I have to give a shout out to my daughter Stephanie, who's in the back there with my granddaughter Grace. So when she was 4, we went to Manassas. How many of you have been to Manassas? Okay. So you guys, for those of you who've been there, you're familiar with the giant statue of Jackson that looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger on the Budweiser Clydesdale? If you've never been to Manassas, I urge you to go. You get a 2-for-1 because you get the first and second battles of Manassas while you're there. But she's 4. We were down in D.C. for a few days, visiting her uncle, and we'd gone to the museums and the monuments, and we had a morning to kind of kill before we went to the zoo in the afternoon. So I was like, let's try this battlefield. You know, I'm not a big Civil War guy at the time. I was like, we'll try this. She would run around and blow off some energy. So we get out there. We get out of the car, she sees this giant statue, she's like, oh, and she runs over to it, and she's like standing beneath it, and oh my gosh, he's got a cool nickname, Stonewall, oh my God, how do you get that? So we had to go in, and she asks all these questions, and she's like just fascinated by Stonewall Jackson. So she starts asking all these questions, and I'm trying to answer, and I'm figuring like, all right, fine, this afternoon there'll be 1,000 questions about panda bears, that's how this goes. But after the zoo, then she went back to Stonewall Jackson questions. And so that began what became a lifelong fascination with this guy, and we started doing family trips to Jackson-related sites. So, cute little blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl, she's going all these places that historians are all like, oh my gosh, a young person who loves history. So she would become sort of this mascot that gets adopted at all those Jackson sites. So one day, we go into the Stonewall Jackson death site. It's called the Jackson Shrine at the time. And there were two historians working there. One was a fellow by the name of Frank O'Reilly, who was in the room where Jackson had died. He's doing some maintenance in there around the clock. And the guy sort of greeting people at the door was a guy named Keith Alexander. And Keith's a former Marine staff sergeant. So you can imagine how warm and cuddly he was from just that. And he didn't like kids. So to compensate, he sort of had like this spiel he would do when a kid would come in. And so, a kid would come in, and his question would be, you have something in common with Stonewall Jackson. And the answer is supposed to be the ticking of the clock in Jackson's death room. Because it's the same clock, still ticking, making the same noise. So that's the routine. So we walk in, and Keith stands there, and he looks at Sept, and he says, you have something in common with Stonewall Jackson. She says, yes, we both have blue eyes. So that throws him off his game. He says, well, you have something else in common with Stonewall Jackson. She says, well, yes. We've both been to Niagara Falls. Frank, Stonewall Jackson never go to Niagara Falls. Yes, he went there on his honeymoon. He looks at Steph, and he gets down on his knees, and he looks in the eye, and he says, who are you? And they start talking. And he's so impressed, he buys a book for her off the shelf that Frank had written. He says, I want you to take this to the room. Have the man in there sign, he wrote this book. So Frank's in there, and he's listening to this whole thing. So Steph comes in with the book. And how many of you have been to the Jackson Shrine? Okay? So the room where he died has just a little gated area where you step in and see the room, but you can't go into the room because of the gate. But the gate was open because Frank was in there cleaning. And so he's the far side of the room, next to the fireplace where the clock is on the mantle. Stephanie gets to the gate. And it's like the Holy Land is open in front of her. And he's just waiting to see what she's going to do. And she walks in, and she's standing there next to the bed that Jackson died in, and she's talking with Frank and asks him if she can sign the book. And she keeps eyeing the bed. This is the holiest of holy relics for this 6-year-old kid. Finally, she says, can I touch the bed? And Frank said, well, we have a lot of famous people who come in here, actors and politicians, and, they want to touch the bed. We don't let people touch the bed, But he didn't say no, and she picks up on that. So she says, well, can I? So he says, okay. And he's sort of expecting her to just kind of slap it and go, oh, touch the bed, ah. But instead she's like, just like that. And that wrapped her right around Frank's finger. Or Frank wrapped Frank right around her finger, excuse me. And he knew right there that something important and special had happened. And so the two of them became friends. And for years, he'd go on trips and send her postcards from Civil War places and bullets from the battlefield and stuff like that. So by the time she was 11, she asked Frank if she could start volunteering at Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania Military Park, which is where the Jackson Shrine is. And he's like, oh, I've been waiting for you to ask. So that began sort of an internship for her for 10 days. We went down there, and I worked at one battlefield, she worked at another, and we had such a good experience that we went down every weekend, or every month, one weekend a month, for years and years and years, until her high school volleyball schedule sort of threw that off. And that's what got me sucked into Civil War stuff, because the park's like, oh, you're a communications professional, you know how to write stuff, don't you? So I started writing things for their website, doing publications for them, writing some books for them, and that led to what eventually became an emerging Civil War. So it's really due to my daughter that I'm here to be able to talk about this tonight. And I'm going to share with you some of the things that I have learned over the course of my Stonewall Jackson adventures. Okay? So we'll start here with this premise that, we're going to put the clicker. See, you guys know, I never use a PowerPoint, so I'm like, technology, how quaint, you know? So, what do we know about Stonewall Jackson? He was born January 21st, 1824. He goes off to West Point. He was poorly prepared for that education that was offered to him there because he comes from a very rural part of western Virginia. He's raised by his bachelor uncles because he had lost his parents, both parents, when he was young. I like to make the comment that it's like he's being raised by Animal House because of all his bachelor uncles. But he's elected constable of his hometown. He's generally considered a responsible, well-respected young man. That's why he gets this appointment to West Point. But, he's not ready for it. He starts out pretty poorly, struggles academically, but this sense of resolve, you may be whatever you resolve to be, really drives him to improve. And over the course of his 4 years of study, he gets better and better and better, rises in the rankings, and his classmates say that if there had been a fifth year while he was at West Point, he would have graduated at the top of his class because he had worked so hard. He goes off to the war, Mexican War, with so many of his classmates, where he's lauded twice for bravery on the battlefield, earning brevets both times. Has a rough time in the post-war army, but then he gets this invitation to go to the Virginia Military Institute to teach artillery instruction, because that's his specialty. He's also supposed to teach natural history and philosophy, what today we would call physics. Jackson was no physicist. He was no physicist instructor. He was a pretty poor teacher. He would memorize the lesson at lunchtime because he had incredible powers of concentration. He would sit in a chair and stare at the wall in his den and memorize the lesson at lunch and then go and recite it back to his students for physics class. And if someone didn't understand something, they would ask him to repeat it, and he would rewind the tape and say the same thing over. And if they still didn't understand it, he would write them up for insubordination and send them off to Superintendent Smith. Okay, so it's not necessarily a great instructor, except that on the artillery field, he was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. And so he actually goes from being called Tom Fool by his students over the course of his 10-year career to eventually be someone they learned to respect, in large part because of how he is as an artillery instructor. And then he goes off to war in 1861. He opposed secession, but he said if Virginia went to war, it would be time to pull the sword from the scabbard and throw the scabbard away. And they would have to be all in. And so, of course, he leads the Corps of Cadets down to Virginia. They're going to use their experience to train all of these volunteers who are coming in to join the Virginia militia. He's going to get stationed at Harper's Ferry for a little bit, and eventually he'll find himself in July of 1861 at Henry House Hill on the plains of Manassas, where Stephanie and I first met him in statue form. Okay? So that's a quick rundown. And I think it's important. Everything I'm about to say comes from a place of love tonight. So here I'm going to light a little candle for Stonewall Jackson. We'll keep that in mind tonight. Here, we'll put a little lemon up here. Just let you know. Everything I'm about to say comes from a place of love. Because Stonewall has these mythic properties, which I think do him an injustice. Because if we look at him as mighty Stonewall, we forget that he was human, that he was fallible, that he could make mistakes, that he was just like us. And if we forget that, I think it makes some of his achievements, it undercuts some of his achievements. Because of course gods can do whatever they want, right? They're gods. But fallible people capable of making mistakes, still doing extraordinary things, to me, makes that all the more marvelous. So if we're going to talk about kind of his greatest hits, I mentioned earlier, I think his capture of Harper's Ferry in September 1862 as part of the Antietam campaign. I think that's his greatest hit.